Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our latest installment of the Civic Leadership and Service Series hosted by the Maurice A. Ferré Institute for Civic Leadership at Florida International University. I'm Dr. Agatha Caraballo, and I have the pleasure of serving as the founding director of the Ferré Institute in the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs. We're very excited to be joined this afternoon with Cecile M. Scoon, who is the president of the League of Women Voters of Florida. Our Civic Leadership and Service Series offers engaging discussions with public service leaders on the areas of engagement, community infrastructure, and social justice. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge today's event partners, first being the League of Women Voters of Florida. And because I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Miami-Dade County, I'd like to give them a shout out as well. Also, the FIU Women and Gender Studies Program, the Department of Public Policy and Administration at FIU, and as well as the African and African Diaspora Studies Program. The League of Women Voters, the mission is empowering voters, defending democracy. The League of Women Voters encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences policy through education and advocacy. The League of Women Voters of Florida Education Fund works to register voters, provides voters with election information, and through voter guides, as well as candidate forums and debates. Cecile Scoon is the current president of the League of Women Voters of Florida, and she is a past president of the League of Women Voters of Bay County. She previously served as the chair of the Florida League's efforts on restoration of rights, including the passing of Florida's 2018 Amendment 4, as well as heading up their healthcare action team. She is a proud member of the Xi Omicron Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and she received a visual and environmental studies undergraduate degree from Harvard in 1981. After graduating from the University of Virginia School of Law in 1984, she spent 5 years as an active duty Air Force JAG prosecuting in military courts, and she retired from the Air Force Reserves as a major in 2005. She is currently a civil rights lawyer in Panama City, Florida. Cecile attempts to protect the rights of those wronged at work due to their race, religion, age, disability, place of birth, or unwanted sexual advances. When not burning the midnight oil drafting lengthy pleadings, Cecile enjoys parenting her 3 children, as well as running, gardening, painting, and watching soccer matches with her best friend, husband, law partner, and League of Women Voters member, Alvin Peters. Welcome again, Cecile, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for this wonderful invitation to talk about leadership. It's something that I think many of us try to figure out what is it and what is our connection to that role. And I'd like to say that from my observation of 61 years of life, a lot of times it is the leadership in a family and the leadership in a community often sits in the heart of a woman. We don't always give that woman credit, that she's the leader of the family, or she's the leader in the church, or she's the leader in another civic organization. But oftentimes, if you are able to connect with these unofficial leaders, then things get done. And whoever has the title, it's often a male, and they do have a role and they're important. But oftentimes, the heart of an organization, the heart of a family, is controlled by a woman who is another kind of leader, may not have the official title. So I want to speak a little bit to that dichotomy, because I think going forward in the world, when women speak up, or women try to bring a new idea or assert some concept in the realm of civics or community organizations, and it's not exactly the party line, if it's a little different, sometimes we have a difficult time being heard, because the person that people are accustomed to listening to and that has a formal designation as leader is someone with a Y chromosome, a male. So we just have that little bit of interplay. And I know that for me, when I would need to assume a leadership role in the world, sometimes those sort of gender roles have a play, and it's just good for us to realize they could be out there, and something that we can intentionally think about and try to step aside or step over or utilize to our advantage. It's just good for us to know that even though by law we're all equal, and certainly we should not be judged just by our gender, but just societal norms and regular practices and subconscious attitudes sometimes impact our leadership roles. I know for me, I saw it one of the first times when I would try cases because I'm a trial lawyer, and oftentimes, I'm almost always up against a man, and so you're getting ready to try the case. You're before the judge, and the male, because they're accustomed to commanding space, walk into the office and start talking, and you only have so much time for a hearing. And the male, a typical woman leader would look at, we have half an hour, I'll go 15 minutes, kind of tie it up, let the other, we would just self regulate. Not so with many male leaders. They'll just keep running on and, oh, there's only 5 minutes. Well, I guess I'll have to reschedule it. So whatever the problem is not addressed in the time it should have been allotted. So I've learned, because again, the differences in my age group anyway of men, if they're not directed what they need to do, sometimes they don't do what they need to do. So after one or two of those, I would walk into the room and, good afternoon, Your Honor. Everyone say good afternoon. And before the thing started, I'd say, sir, just so we know, or ma'am, how we're going to allocate our time, let's discuss that right now. And the judge goes, oh, yeah, Mr. Smith, you're going to, if he would go first for procedural reasons, we'll go with 15 minutes and then I'll stop you and Miss Scoon will have her turn. So you just have to kind of like observe what's going on and make that intentional redirection. So, I mean, part of me wanted to sort of get a little angry, but I need to show power and I need to show control. And sometimes if I show that anger, oh, you were overtaking my time. I set the hearing, and you've spoken for 20 minutes and you've left me 10. Then that is a true statement, but in the eyes of the judge who I need to convince, am I going to pay a penalty for being that assertive? Am I going to pay a penalty of, somehow not being in charge or in control? So those are the kinds of a little incident, a little concept of how you have to think about handling it. Because I had to think about it. And the plan I came up with, which I think was very civil, very in control, very, all about the business, got my job done, got my argument made, and that was how I went about that. There will be many other times where things like that will happen. There are situations where we need to speak up on a particular issue. And again, back to women have generally been taught to be more polite. So we might raise our hand, or with Zooms, we can raise our hand in the reaction. And sometimes you just see the conversation going back and forth, and what? Because not everybody plays by the same rules. So you need to assess the environment that you are in and sort of deconstruct your own training. If you have been trained, as many women have been, and certainly I would say it's also a race-based training in many Black and Brown communities, respect when someone is speaking is to be given at all times. It is your turn to speak. It is not your turn to speak. And those are the kind of the training that many Black and Brown communities are embedded in our culture. And when we get into the larger culture, sometimes you're in a situation where there's a little bit more of a free-for-all. And they would say, this is collegiate, we're all just talking. So you have to recognize the tools that you are given, in either for ethnic reasons or whatever reasons. Does it fit the arena and where you need to lead? And so you have to sometimes get out there and see, but just be prepared. If you raising your hand means that you're not going to get your point made because no one's going to call on you, then you're going to have to switch gears. You're going to have to come up with another thing, which, if that happens to me, then I say, excuse me, I've had my hand up very politely, but I'm really not going to allow the issue that I need to present, the facts that I need to bring to the table. I'm not going to allow that collegiate thing to prevent the issue from being brought up. So you kind of have to think about that. And my experience has been, as a woman, I think twice. And as a Black woman, I probably think thrice, because I am trying to deal with uh, training that I've been given that would work in my home, in my church, with my family and my people. Everybody knows those rules. And I don't have to remind them to, you're taking up too much time. You're doing these other things. But when I'm in a different environment, I need to acknowledge that and come up with a plan. And I think I've heard many women talk about the politeness issue. Again, it's the same thing. We're taught to be polite and we don't want to have a disagreement. But when we are in a role where we need to carry forth an idea or a concept, we kind of have to almost like take ourselves out of ourselves. It's not about my comfort zone of trying to make sure the issue is heard. It's doing it for the issue. It's not for Cecile. And we need to kind of like tell ourselves that the bigger goal is to represent that equity issue that you need to bring out, is to correct the record. Me as a lawyer, I hear something that's said wrong, I jot it down. I need to correct the record. I need to direct the court's attention to the place in the deposition where whatever the other counsel said, it was disproven. That I need to be up on my game to be prepared to do that. And if that means, you have to speak up a little bit more or whatever, you just manage and um, you take that stance. I think some of the other things that I think particularly affect women is as leaders is trying to balance your home life with your professional life. And I know many women who have stayed home with their children, they're my age, and they still felt guilty. And I'm like, but you stayed home with them. Why are you guilty? Many times we feel we can never give our children enough, and even the ones who stayed home. And it kind of was liberating for me to hear that, because I have several children, three. And it was very liberating because I thought, well, I thought I was the only one feeling guilty about it. But what I understood was sometimes there's a sense that you just give everything to the family, and anything you take away or carve out is something the family got less. And what I have learned, and sometimes the hard way, and looking at others and trying to make adjustments again, is sometimes you're not being there, at the beginning of preparation for a meal, and it's allowing the others in your life, whether it be just your partner, male or female, or your children, or whoever you associate with, let them carry some of the weight that we have generally as women. We do it all. I wanted to fix dinner. Well, you can still participate in fixing dinner, but if the potato takes, an hour to cook, they can wash it and put it in the oven or the toaster oven. Let people help you. Let your team around you participate in making you be the best person that you can be. And then what happens is they're often very proud of the fact that they helped you. And I know that that can be a derailing impact on a lot of women when they want to go forward in life in leadership roles. Well, something's going to give. I'm going to have to sacrifice. And you should think about it very carefully, whether you're male or female. But I think still in this world, a lot of it falls on the woman, even though many of the younger men, and my husband is very involved also, but still, when it comes right down to it, there are a lot of times that I'm the decision maker, or I'm the one going to the school meeting, I'm the one attending the band thing. It would fall on me a lot of times. And so I think being intentional and talking about it and having others help you be your best self is very important in building that trajectory. The other thing I've learned is that before I get involved in an activity, I try to think, is this something that I need to do? Is because after a while, you realize that there's certain things that you're really good at, that you have an affinity for, that you start working in that arena and time flies. You don't even realize time is there. When you start spending your time in those orbits, in those venues where you're able to come up with good solutions that others listen to, and it just fits your persona or where you are. I think we should pay attention to those opportunities, because there are other times when you want to spend time and it's like chalk, fingernails on a chalkboard. It's just not working. It's a bad fit. That time of the meeting is right when you have to, you know, clock in or clock out at work. There's some structural problem with that connection, or it's not in your heart. And so I think a lot of leaders, we become leaders because we want to impact the world. We want to make a difference. Others see that in us and they come to us and, well, would you chair this committee? Would you just come? They see that leadership spark that you have, which is a beautiful thing that we have that. But sometimes they'll ask you to participate and it's not needed. So why is it not needed? You can look and see that there are others in the community or on that committee that can do it. And maybe you can just have a side conversation with some of those members and share some of your ideas, but you don't have to take on the full role of being a member of the board or a member. So you can still have impact. Or you can say, hey, this is a project I'm very excited about. Would you call me up when you get around to planning that project? I'm not going to be able to come to the regular scheduled meetings or do that kind of regular work, but I'm all about this issue. And so you can still have that connection and be a part of your community. But I would say the tips I'm trying to give are, you need to conserve your time. You need to be intentional about things that you're going to take on in the home, as we talked about sharing duties with the family or your partner, and then also take that intentionality of being thinking about it when you're asked time and time again to be on this or that committee. Because there's, as my mother would tell me, there's a season for everything. So maybe this isn't your season to be involved in 20 different committees. Maybe it's your season to be involved in one. And so, for example, for me with the league, by the time I got to a position where I came on the state board, that was about 6 years ago. And I wanted to be involved. It was wonderful. And then opportunities for leadership came about for Amendment 4. And I just couldn't help myself. That was something I was so passionate about, trying to convince citizens to have restoration of voting rights for persons with felony convictions after they completed their sentence. I literally couldn't stop myself. And that was something where I kind of got in my realm and would try to manage leadership roles. And I had other issues because there were other allies and parties who were doing the same thing, maybe not the exact same way, but you have to balance doing things. And in that role, I decided it was way more important for the league to be a supporter and to get it done than for the league to try to joust around to get front and center. So if there were spokespersons and there were people that were beloved in that arena, what I need to do is do the league work, but certainly bolster that person, give them all the tools that the league had, and let them command other tools. And that's another way of being a leader. You don't always have to be in front. You can be helping someone who is well suited to that role, well beloved, well known, and help them manage the sort of white water of navigating any leadership role and help them be as successful as they are. So there's just, leadership is something that should be intentional and thought about and planned. So the last thing I'd like to leave you with is I think it's really, really important for us to save precious time for our own spirits and our own batteries, regardless of whether you have kids or not. I mentioned kids, that's my setup. But this is true for a single person, a young person, an older person. When we get in leadership roles, like the situation on Amendment 4 for me, I was so passionate about it because someone said this to me and it just clicked. They said, this is the last vestige of slavery in our day, because those laws came to shut the mouth of formerly enslaved people immediately after slavery ended. That's all I had to hear. I was like, this is the most compelling effort of my lifetime at that time. And so it was fine for me to invest the time and energy through the league and many of our members and many of our allies. We were all in, and many of us had a very similar attitude. But at the same time, you have to say, I want to be there for the marathon. This is not a sprint. So if I need to get up in the morning and walk the dog, or I need to get up in the morning and consult my religious text, or read a poem or write a poem, or sometimes for some people, I need to pull a few weeds. Just whatever time of the day that you need to center yourself, whether it be a formal meditation or just kind of like calming the voices in your head, all the things you got to do, all the papers that you owe, and just center yourself and get within yourself and greet yourself and ask yourself what you need to do to be your better person. And I have found that when I do that, when I take that time, I actually function better as a leader because I'm more patient. I can hear, I can make that decision, I can be intentional about my leadership role. So sometimes I have to say I've learned the hard way that it's much better for everybody to take that time that you need on a daily basis to center yourself, and sometimes just give yourself a big dollop of time and consideration, just as you would to a stranger or a friend. You have to be a friend to yourself, and that will allow you to deal with the things that we talked about, whether you've got your hand up and nobody's calling on you, or someone's not listening to your point, or you have to spend extra time, the different demands of leadership, or that you have an opportunity to shine and share a great concept that you've created. You're going to be in a better position to do that in a more positive way that people can respond to when you take that time to fill your battery pack and take care of yourself. So those are some of the things I'd like to share with my experience with leadership.
Awesome, thank you. I'm reflecting on so many points that you did, and so many things resonated. When I think about how I think, especially as women, I feel like we can't be all things to all people, and without being able to save something for ourselves. And like you said, so that we don't deplete. And one thing I've had to learn is how to say no, but also at the same time, saying no in a way that opens up the opportunity to others. So being able to help kind of redirect. So I really appreciate that. And all the things that you said about reclaiming time and, not being able to kind of speak up. One thing in case we didn't mention in your bio, but I think is very significant, is that you're the first Black woman to serve as the president of the League of Women Voters of Florida. And I know there have been conversations about intersectionality, especially within women's rights. We recently had the 100th anniversary of the suffrage movement. And I think about, we weren't given the right to vote. We had to fight for it. And that also leads to the Amendment 4. And if you wouldn't mind, Marisol had actually posted, and I want to give a quick shout out to my friends from the Miami-Dade League, Marisol Zenteno, Susan Windmiller, Maribel Button, and Monica Bustinzo. But Marisol had posted, if you wouldn't mind, just for those that maybe aren't familiar as much with Amendment 4, to give a little bit more context there.
Absolutely. Well, to give a little historical context, immediately after the Civil War, the federal government had some plans to try to make amends because the slavery had been so atrocious and so terrible. 40 acres and a mule was discussed, all sorts of things. And in the end, for political expediency, many enslaved people were just left to their own devices and didn't have much guidance and no money and little to no education. And so the southern states started saying, well, we can't have these people ruling over us and this and that. So they created all these rules and traps to prevent, at the time, only men could vote. So the newly freed, formerly enslaved males, African American males, they created rules where they couldn't do it. And one of them was, let's tell them that the farm that they were born and bred on, and they used to fish in that pond, that's my pond and that's my fish. Whoops, you fished my pond when yesterday you were enslaved and today you're a free man. That's a felony. And they deliberately tried to felonize much things that used to not were just free. They said it's mine and you have to pay me and I'm going to felonize you, with the intent on taking their voting rights away forever. So it was like a big net that was trying to capture as many black men as they could. And they were very successful. That's where that came from. And it's in black and white. We can all see the analysis of why they did it and the purpose. Because they were not hiding anything at that time. They didn't think that many African American people were equal. They didn't think that they needed to hide anything. They would just say it in writing. We need to control these savages, or whatever terms they used. And that is where the law was embedded in our Florida Constitution. It was for that reason over 150 years ago, shortly after slavery ended. So we go forward all these years, and what happened over time is, even though that's where it started, it impacted everybody. All right? White, black, green, or yellow. And with the onset of many of the societal problems that we have with people self-medicating, they're in pain or getting hooked on medicine, or the different things that we struggle with. Many different groups were impacted by that felony law, and of all races and all economic backgrounds. And so the people were very willing to hear, and as part of many of our religious foundations, whether you're Islamic, Jewish, Christian, once you have paid for your offense, like the prodigal son, once you have done what you should do to make amends, you are welcomed back into your society and your community, and you're given another chance. So the Second Chances campaign was very well run, and that's what it played on, our concepts of giving people a second chance. And lo and behold, in November of 2018, it passed by the highest percentage, almost 65%. At the time, it only required 60%. And many studies and polls showed it was almost equal between white, black, and economic levels. Because I think the concept of many people being felonized, everybody experienced it for the reasons stated. So we passed it. Immediately after that, our legislators, which have a little history sometimes of changing and reinterpreting citizens' initiatives, because this was brought by the citizens. It was the citizen ballot that passed the citizen initiative. They said, we got to fix this. What did they do? It was a big battle during that session. In the end, they said, you must pay all your fines and fees in addition to finishing your hard time in prison. In addition to doing your probation, you have to pay financial fines and fees before you can vote. Well, that's not what we intended when it was passed, but that's what was laid on it. There was litigation, we lost. And so that was where a lot of time and energy was spent by League members and many other allies. One, to educate the people about the petition, then to get it on the ballot, then to convince people to vote for it, and after that, to educate people about it, and then after that, to litigate. So that was because we were fighting to reclaim the original definition. So that was one of those, when is this going to end problems? And right now, we are still working to make things better, to just tie it up. We still have the obligation of having to pay fines and fees, but the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition with Desmond Meade, who was their leader, who just won the MacArthur Foundation Award 2 days ago. With congratulations to him and his team. They have a program where they pay fines and fees for the cases where they can do it. And the League has a program where we refer citizens who need their sentences modified so that they can vote. Because in the statute, they did put it could be modified, but most returning citizens would not be able to do that themselves. So the League has a program, and you can contact us with canivote at lwvfl.org. And we will refer you to a pro bono lawyer who will help that citizen. And we've helped hundreds of returning citizens. And we want to ramp it up and touch more people. So no one's given up on it, but the easier process of maybe moving 800,000 people into becoming voting potential for voting citizens has been slowed down by the statute. So I've probably gone into a little more detail than was expected, but that's pretty much what is there.
No, I appreciate that. And if you wouldn't mind putting the Can I Vote link in the chat, that would be awesome. It actually kind of leads to one of the questions in the chat from Chloe Little, who is an ambassador with the Ferré Institute. And she posts, did you know that you wanted to be a civil rights attorney when you started law school? How has active civic engagement and leadership influenced your legal career?
That is such a great question. I decided that I wanted to do civil rights. I attended school in Cambridge, and my college had invested in South Africa, which was abhorrent to me that anybody would support a nation that literally treated its citizens differently based on their race. They had black, they had white, and they had mixed. And depending on what you look like and who your parents were, literally you would get a totally different experience. And I just abhorred that. So we all marched around about that at school. And then one day in my African American history class, I was sitting there and I was learning about segregation and sitting at the back of the bus. And I had been raised in the Caribbean, where my father is from. And I didn't know African American history that well. And I didn't know that my parents had lived that because they never talked to me about it. But I sat in their class, 19 years old, and I said to myself, oh, I'm so glad mom and dad never had this horrible humiliation. How terrible. And I literally counted backwards 5 minutes later and realized my parents had lived through all of it, but had just never told me. I was so angry, so frustrated, and so confused about the closeness of time and how I had just come under that opportunity, that those experiences of segregation. So really it was at that moment, I did go home and talk with my parents, and their answer was, we didn't want to frighten you because you were going to go to predominantly white school. You were raised in the Caribbean. We didn't want to throw you off, you know. That was the answer I was given. I know they did it out of love. I was still annoyed with them. But at that moment I said, wow, I have benefited from the sacrifices, the threats, people's lives being taken of all these people. If I get through and I get finished college, I'm going to law school and I'm going to be a civil rights lawyer. So that's, for me, was a compelling, pretty powerful concept of timing, and has been my base for why I do what I do. And it translates to my league work.
Absolutely. Find something that motivates you, and if you want to make a difference in the world. On another note, I would like to bring up, some of you may know that this Saturday is the Women's March, which is taking place in locations nationwide. And this kind of leads to one of the questions. The Women's March is to raise awareness and defend women's reproductive rights. So Chloe also asked, what advice do you have for student leaders who wish to emphasize the urgency of reproductive health and justice matters in a practical but nonpartisan way?
Well, the league will be taking a front and forward stance. We just did a process that we do every year to determine our legislative priorities of things we're going to focus on in the coming session. And reproductive rights, not surprisingly, was one of the top ones that we will be addressing. So that means for the league, we'll be looking at the bills, we'll be testifying, we'll be writing opposition, we'll be working with other allies, which many organizations are standing with women, many women, to fight against it. So that's in the works. We've already written a letter of support and against the Texas ban because we saw that it was a possibility. And I'll see during the talk if I can find it and post it here. So we've already written a letter to the governor and to the legislators before it was filed, the bill was filed, because we could kind of see which way the wind was blowing, and so many what the league would consider oppressive bills have been shared out through the states through uh, the Republican network. And so when we saw that happen in Texas, we were concerned about Florida. So we will continue that and certainly encourage individuals to join the league. Students can join the league for free. So you can go to our website, lwvfl.org, and look for membership. And there's a women's march, there's writing letters to editors, there's joining the league, and many other organizations if that is something you're comfortable with. And of course, there's the partisan parties, but the league is nonpartisan. So we don't pick parties and we don't pick candidates. We do advocate for issues, and we want to educate people on both sides of all issues so they can make up their own mind. Oh, Blake, did you put the article in there? Yes, he did. Blake is our communications director at the league, and I think he put our article that we wrote to take our public stance, and we'll be continuing with a public stance. I can't hear you all of a sudden. It's showing that you're muted there. Probably what the director can do is unmute you. Let's see. Well, while you're figuring out the unmute, I'm going to look in the chat. Can everybody else hear you? I can't hear you, but everybody else can hear you. Agatha, if you want to put questions in the chat, and then I people are saying they cannot hear Agatha. Can people hear me? Okay, people can hear me. So Agatha, put your question in the chat and I will respond verbally. Well, while you're doing that, Agatha, I was looking over my notes. There was another tip I can share with people while you get your question. And that is, I suggest that when you find something that you're very passionate about, or you really want to get involved with, it's a very easy mistake to rush to the front of the line and try to direct traffic, which can step on toes of people who've been there a very long time and have other ideas. So, what I've learned to do, and I have to make myself do it sometimes, and I struggle, is I try to wait. And when I join an organization and I see, wow, they really need some help with this, or I could really help them with that, or another person could lead them out of this problem, I take note, I make a little note to myself, but I make myself work on whatever they're working on and help them be successful in the things that they've already set forth that they want to work on. And that way I'm building trust, I'm building bridges, I'm building a liaison so that when it's time for me to bring in a new idea or maybe a resolution to a long-standing problem that they didn't have before them, it's like they know me. They know that I've been a good sister to whatever person I'm working with, to the organization, and that I am willing to do um, the hard work of being responsive to what's going on, and I don't always expect that I'm going to get the opportunity to lead and come out with my ideas. So I do that, and I also try as much as possible to look and see what ideas are already working or partially working, and I try to build off of what is already there to help them be more successful in what they're doing. Again, rather than come up with a brand new idea that's going in a different direction, I just go, wow, this could use a little more tweaking. It's working well. Let me just take that system that's already in place and maybe add, give it a little vitamins, and then the program that they already have, they're excited because they're successful. And then later on, a year or two, it takes time. When it's time for a new idea, you're able to kind of suggest it, and there's goodwill. Again, when you walk in there and you're a stranger and you want to change everything, and oh, that's not right, let me help you, even though your heart is good, people can get a little bit offended, and you're making life harder for yourself in that leadership role. It takes more time, but you'll find that people are much more receptive to you if you come in quietly and softly and just help with what is already going on and then make that go for it. So it looks like you might have fixed the challenge. Oh, there
I
you
did.
go.
I apologize for the technical issues. Of course, it's bound to happen in this day and age. My computer
Of course.
had to log back in through a laptop to get back in. But again, sorry for the confusion, but thank you for rolling with the punches and being able to pick up on it. So I see we have another comment in the chat. And she asks us, how did you inform your children of these histories, and around what age were they? I personally have a 17-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son, so we have these conversations and at different ages.
Oh gosh, these are some great questions. I spoke with my husband and we talked about it because that experience I had was extreme, and I can remember all of the feelings to this day as if it were yesterday. I think for many of our children of color, when they have the deepening understanding of our history, it can be very, very frightening and very alienating, very depressing, enraging. It's going to happen eventually, one or more of those emotions as you have a deeper understanding. But what I tried to do to prepare our children is we would always take them to every cultural event, and so they would be there with us. They've marched every year of their life when the Martin Luther King celebration marched that here locally in Panama City. Now they might have been on my back or in a stroller or in a little wagon as they were small, but they always marching. As they were 6 or 7, they could walk themselves and put them in the wagon. So they know they're experiencing with mom and dad the commemoration of some of our great leaders and discussion of these are the outstanding problems that we still have. And they did that because all of these community activists were their like uncle and aunt. In other words, we immersed our children in it rather than separate them out. It wasn't like that happened to strangers. it happened to people that watched them grow up. So we try to take a different role, at the same time making them feel safe, loved. You are normal. Everything about you is beautiful. And we would do that with a lot of books, experiences. And we were also fortunate. We were able to go home to my father's home for them to see a different definition of race and what race means. So we would take them home uh, about once a year. And so they would play with their Caribbean cousins and all their people. And we're just slowly over time able to get a more sophisticated understanding the grays of race and the grays of what one nation says it means versus the other. So again, that was very intentional to try to do those things and put the money and resources and scheduled time off for those experiences. I would say all of the children are still now figuring out what does race mean, what does it mean to them, how are other people putting them in boxes, how do they want to step out of those boxes. I think for most people of color, it's ongoing as we evolve and as we understand more. And back to that battery, make sure that that's another reason why our batteries have to be strong. If you have that intersectionality of being a language minority, a race minority, being a woman also, those things, or any other thing that makes you a little bit other than the standard traditional white male, heterosexual male, whatever intersectionalities you have, it's like embrace it with love and acknowledge the issues, but build your support systems there. So that's kind of how we've done it.
And I think it's a big part of it. Is, like you said, embracing our differences, but then also focusing on those things that draw us together, and where we can find common ground. I'm really proud to share that the Ferré Institute has a team of students that are going to be participating in the It's Up to Us campus competition through the Clinton Global Initiative to promote civic leadership and awareness of physical policy on campus. What advice would you have for student activists, who want to get involved and, finding organizations that speak to them?
Wow. With the websites and everything, you can check out a lot of organizations before you have to go to 5 or 6 meetings to kind of like figure out what they're standing for. So go ahead and do your homework. If you're wanting to get involved, you can talk with the leadership, meet with them maybe for tea or coffee, and say, what is your vision in the next 12 months? What are you trying to get accomplished? If you have something in your heart or your mind that you think needs doing, bring that up. How do you think, is that possible that could be part of the agenda at some point? Again, not right away, because people don't want to be told by the new person all these changes. Generally speaking, they don't. You may be the one person that gets a different response, but just you would say, is it possible we can move, that this organization can move in that direction? And sometimes they'll be honest and go, wow, the leadership we have, the membership we have, we addressed something like that 6 months ago and it was no go. And then again, do I need to invest my time in an organization where I'm tilting at the windmill in the organization? Why not look for an organization that's tilting your way and that you can fairly soon assist them in the work they're already doing that meets your objectives? So I think a little research would go a long way.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. As we come to the conclusion of our program, I wanted to open it up to any other questions or comments from the audience, but as well any final thoughts that you may have.
Well, as you search for questions and comments, I would say this, for any person that feels like part of who they are is what was considered the other, whether it's a gender issue, a sexual identity issue, your ethnic group, your language, your religion, or any combination of the above. If you have a history, or your people have a history of sort of being marginalized, I would say right now, in this time, in this moment, there are more opportunities for the majority people of who still control and own much of the resources, the financial resources of this nation. There's much more of a willingness to listen and hear. So it's a time for you to groom yourself if this is something you're interested in. Get involved in organizations and gently and thoughtfully speak up. And I think people will be surprised that the door is open. People are in a position now, from all the terrible things we've witnessed in the last couple of years, and one of them that many people mention is the murder of Mr. George Floyd. That was just so atrocious and so undeniable. And then the sharing of so many of the police killings of Black and brown people, it absolutely revealed a deeply embedded attitude about the lives of Black people and how they're treated. Black and brown people. Then it was, again, accentuated with COVID. Who had access? Who didn't? Who had to go to work? Who didn't? You know, all of these things have been accentuated. And I think there are many organizations and many groups and many people are more in a position to try to listen and to accept the intersectionality of where we are. So it's just, to a certain extent, it's an opportunity now for those who are not the standard norm to have an opportunity to have their voices heard. So think carefully before you speak, because people might be listening to you a lot more than you think. But I encourage everybody, regardless if you are that white male, and if you have a great idea, that doesn't mean you need to be silent. But I think it's important for us all to know what privileges we bear in the world, and to be thoughtful about that. And I know I use, for example, in over the years, since I'm an employment discrimination lawyer, so I often have to communicate to juries who are all white and don't understand the experience of the other. And so I've tried to use examples that bring it to heart. So, for example, one of the things I tell people, I said, me as an American, I have so many benefits as an American. I didn't go to your country and do anything to your leader or impact your economy or do the things that sometimes covertly or openly, things are, this leader is given favor and this one is not. But I still benefit to some extent by the actions of my government and my leaders. And so I don't get to go into the third world and say to them, Cecile didn't do that. That doesn't matter. Cecile didn't do that. But Cecile needs to acknowledge, myself as a human, I need to acknowledge that my country did it. And by living in that country and having many of the goods of the country, I have received some kind of benefit from that. And it's incumbent upon me, Cecile, to try to work to better the actions of my nation, the government, and the different policies that we show to other nations. I don't get a free ride and go, I didn't do it. I gotta say, I'm in this world, I'm in this country, which is a beautiful country with many opportunities. But when problems are brought up, I don't get the out to simply say, Cecile did not do that personally, therefore I have no obligation. We're all in it together. And because I receive many of the benefits of this nation, I feel as an American citizen that I should be involved in trying to have the nation live up to its highest ideals and to address some of the problems.
Awesome. This has been an amazing hour. Thank you so much just for your time and for your words of wisdom, and really just getting a lot of us really thinking about what we can do in our community and what our roles are. I want to take the opportunity again to acknowledge our partners for this event, the League of Women Voters of Florida, and again, giving a shout out to the League of Women Voters from Miami-Dade County as well. The FIU Women and Gender Studies Program, the Department of Public Policy and Administration, and the African and African Diaspora Studies Program. I encourage you to visit the links and learn more about the League. And with that being said, I just want to thank you again, and sorry for the complications earlier, but thank you for your time. And again, just for all the work that you do and for your service to our community.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure. And I can say I met some of the Miami leagues. Those ladies and gentlemen are fabulous. So I encourage, if you're in the Miami area, get involved. I think you'll be welcome and you'll be pleasantly pleased.
Awesome. Thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. And hope you'll join us again for our next installment, which will be on October 12th. It will be a panel of Puerto Rican diaspora civic leaders. That'll be October 12th at 6 p.m. So keep an eye out for that flyer and save the dates. We'll have Dr. Francis Colon, Senior Director of the International Climate Policy at the Center for American Progress, William Ramos from City University of New York, Ramon Cruz, President of the Sierra Club, and Marcos Villar, President of Alianza and the Alianza for Progress. Thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful evening.